In Star Wars The Clone Wars, General Grievous isn't really depicted as the most tactically competent antagonist in the show, often coming off as quite the opposite. Of course, we all know by now that this portrayal is misleading. Indeed, we've already done a longer video on why General Grievous was actually rather terrifying before. But the extent of his tactical genius is often overshadowed by his Jedi killing abilities and his fear spreading abilities, and that's a fairly important part of his character. General Grievous was Supreme Commander of the Confederacy for a good reason, and in this video, we'll be taking a look at exactly what that reason was.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
All strategists had their own strengths and weaknesses, except, of course, for the legendary Grand Admiral Thrawn, whose only weakness was the lack of natural resistance to knives. And in the grand scheme of things, Grievous was an excellent tactician. According to Labyrinth of Evil, Grievous lost comparatively few battles over the course of the Clone Wars, and that book's depiction of his character displays an excellent understanding of the nuances of battle planning, especially at Belderone and Coruscant. Other sources back up this assertion, with Operation Dirge's Lance standing testament to how good Grievous was at his job. But there was more to being Supreme Commander than just winning battles. Grievous's tactical genius is actually expressed the most through another aspect of the role, one that's very easy to forget: organization. That General Grievous was able to organize the CIS military into a coherent fighting force was nothing short of a miracle, even with the Sith backing him up. It's even more impressive that he not only homogenized the hundreds of smaller militaries that made up the great fighting force, but also turned their diversity of equipment into a strength. Let's take a step back for a bit. The CIS military that General Grievous came into command of was nothing short of a mess. Military forces in the galaxy had been decentralized for 1,000 years by that point, with most duties being carried out by sector-based planetary security forces. But even then, the Republic military was considerably better organized. Loyalist PSFs had been united into an internally consistent system, and the rest of the Republic military, namely the Grand Army, the Navy, and the Starfighter Corps, were a singular, united fighting force, completely coherent, even if lacking in numbers. The CIS military was anything but completely coherent. It was really just a union of smaller militaries, a mix of the hundreds of PSFs that had joined with the Separatists, and about a dozen distinct private droid armies owned by large corporations. It was a powerful force, certainly, but it was badly disjointed and severely lacking in internal unification. The different systems of the PSFs weren't really a problem like with the Republic, but the CIS hadn't yet effectively utilized their resources on a larger scale. The droid armies were much more of a problem. All of them had been designed for different purposes, and so were organized and programmed differently, with their own rank systems that weren't at all the same as those of the others. It wasn't a good state for any sort of military force to be in. Of all the CIS military's component armies, the Trade Federation's Trade Defense Force was the largest and strongest, as well as the best suited for war. Thanks to Darth Sidious's influence, the TDF had been overhauled shortly before the Battle of Naboo, and the overhaul had reshaped it into a system designed for, well, operations like the Battle of Naboo. The TDF's ground forces had an exceptionally coherent rank structure based on how droids could be divided between various levels of troop transports, with the largest ground unit, an army, being the equivalent of one Lucre-class battleship's full complement. These battle droids came in large numbers and were backed by STAPs, AATs, and MTTs, providing the ground force with almost everything it would need for standard invasion operations. The TDF also possessed a massive private navy, which included core ships, battleships, and carrier/destroyers, as well as massive swarms of vulture droids. Their navy alone, at the start of the Clone Wars, outclassed that of the Republic, and possessed both a sufficiently diverse array of warships and a system for deploying and protecting them. The TDF, alone among the component forces of the CIS military, was completely equipped for war. But the TDF wasn't the only part of the military, and it couldn't fight the war alone. The Techno-Union Droid Army and the Commerce Guild Punitive Forces, the next largest components of the Droid Army, were less well prepared. The Techno-Union possessed an impressive array of battle droids, which it owed to all but completely owning the combat droid production industry, but they were lacking in larger droids and tanks to back them up, a problem they would eventually solve on their own. The Commerce Guild had the opposite issue. Their spider droids performed wonderfully, but they didn't have much infantry to lead the charge. In space, there were similar discrepancies. The Techno-Union's fleet was laughably inadequate, though they had plenty of starfighters, while the Commerce Guild had plenty of light destroyers and not nearly enough fighter squadrons to escort them. What's maddening about this is that the Commerce Guild and Techno-Union had the resources to fill the gaps in each other's forces, but they didn't. The Commerce Guild owned swaths of mining worlds, but didn't have the production facilities to turn the ore they mined into warships and droids. The Techno-Union had those facilities in droves, but were experiencing material shortages. The problem simply lay in lack of communication. The two were in charge of their own small militaries as they saw it, and so they didn't think to pool their resources. Other competent forces of the CIS military were outright incomplete. The IGBC Collections and Security Division could contribute tanks and warships, but it relied on other factions to provide infantry and starfighters, the Geonosians supplying the latter and likely the former as well. The Corporate Alliance's droid army was mostly just droid tanks and organic Kurivar Fusiliers, as well as a few destroyers that rarely saw action, even after Grievous took over. All of this dysfunction could have crippled the Confederacy and allowed the Republic to win the war much sooner, but General Grievous ensured that things went much differently. When he became Supreme Commander, he did what other military leaders in the CIS had failed to do. He reformed the CIS military into a cohesive unit. Even better, he reformed it into a cohesive unit that had a wide variety of strengths, and organized its forces better than the Republic, the Rebel Alliance, or even the Empire ever managed to do. Right off the bat, he began forcing the various components of the Confederacy's war machine to work together. While previously, the industrial worlds controlled by the Separatist Council's megacorporations had worked primarily with themselves, they began to coordinate to make production more efficient. Soon enough, Commerce Guild mining worlds began shipping their surpluses off to Techno-Union mech worlds, which began turning the metals into Commerce Guild warship models to bolster the numbers of the CIS Navy. The same pattern began happening everywhere, all over the Confederacy. Next, Grievous pulled the resources of the corporate militaries together, shaping them into a singular droid army and Confederate Navy. Commanders from all various factions began leading armies of Trade Federation and Techno-Union battle droids, backed by Commerce Guild spider droids and Corporate Alliance tanks, while the Navy began using fleets made of more diverse warship mixes, drawn from several different private navies. Grievous also began exploiting the resources of the PSFs. Under him, the CIS military collected scrap metal from them to put to use making droids and warships, and the PSFs began to coordinate to streamline resupplying of frontline forces. The warships controlled by the PSFs were completely assimilated into the CIS Navy, which was especially effective as many of those warships had been of models already in service in the navies of larger corporate factions, especially Munificent class star frigates and Rikusent class light destroyers. Perhaps most importantly, Grievous completely overhauled the rank system and internal structure of the CIS military. Previously, each of the military's component force had their own ranks and structures, which caused plenty of confusion when they were made to work together. Grievous made a slightly modified version of the Trade Federation's droid rank structure the standard for the whole droid army, and implemented a parallel structure for organic forces based on the one used by the Kurivar Fusiliers. He also designed an internal structure for the CIS Navy that could fully accommodate the millions of ships at its disposal, one divided neatly into about 100 fleets. These changes led to a dramatic increase in effectiveness for the CIS military, especially since they were particularly well executed. For all of his tactical shortcomings, General Grievous understood the need for asset diversity, something none of the other important military leaders in the Star Wars movies really got down. Instead of standardizing certain tank models or warship classes and relegating others to secondary roles, Grievous fully utilized every single asset the diverse array of forces under his command gave him access to. This displayed constantly in most Clone Wars stories. CIS ground forces didn't really have a standard loadout of vehicles to back up their droids with. They used a wide variety of different models interchangeably, depending on which model would be the best for their particular mission. This was even more true with the Navy. While the Republic usually relied on 1 or 2 warship classes per strike force, the CIS typically doubled that, competently mixing cruisers, light destroyers, battleships, and everything between to create diverse fleets that were oftentimes much more effective. This is an excellent strategy, and all of it owes to General Grievous. Evidently, he understood that every warship class, every starfighter type, and every tank model inevitably has a weakness. To compensate, he mixed them in ways where they would be able to cover for each other's shortcomings. The Republic took a long time to figure this out, and for much of the war, they just threw star destroyers or assault ships at targets, ignoring the massive weaknesses that both of those warships had without any sort of compensation whatsoever. So that's why General Grievous really was deserving of the role of Supreme Commander. But as per usual guys, I want to know what you think. Have you ever thought about this before, or were your perceptions warped by the Clone Wars rendition of Grievous? Let us know in the comments section below. And as per usual guys, just before you go, make sure you check out the wider Geetsly's community on our Geetsly's gaming network with our Gmod and Roblox, our Geetsly's main Discord server where you can chat with other like-minded Star Wars fans, and our Second History channel, where you can watch some more content with my voice, except it's based around World War II history. So they're all in the description below guys, make sure you check them out. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.